What's up, guys? Nick from P2W Fantasy here with a quick video talking about some cheap values for 2021. What we mean by that, I'll get into when it comes to being cheap or a value. But this video is more for redraft focuses. Maybe for those that are in win now mode in their leagues as well, because we're focusing on 2021 itself and some guys that I think could be of good value that are slipping in drafts, or they're very cheap for trades and things like that. So we'll jump right into that video. So defining cheap value, ADP, average draft pick. That's where these guys are going in drafts. A lot of these guys, or these guys that I'm going to talk about now, are not going super high in drafts, but can bring some good value. So we look at the cost versus the opportunity. What is the draft capital for these guys? What's going to cost you if you are in some sort of trade, either right when the season starts, or in a dynasty league if you are in that win now mode? Two different ways to look at it. Cost versus opportunity. Is the cost small but the opportunity is big? That's how you win out in fantasy for both redraft and dynasty. Volume is another thing I just want to touch base on. I'm huge on volume. So volume to me means touches, involvement. So if a guy has the chance to get a lot of targets as a pass catcher, or a lot of carries as a rusher, or is on the field a ton and has that chance to be involved, I think that's all big and shows some good upside for players. And I think volume for me is something I look for all of my assets all the time, because I don't like the boom or bust sort of guys. I like the guys that are consistently getting some sort of involvement. So these three factors, ADP, cost versus opportunity, and then volume, are key when it comes to identifying some guys that can be very valuable that you may be able to get for the low right now. So first guy here on the list, Brandon Cooks. So I put out a tweet today saying something along the lines of Brandon Cooks might be the cheapest wide receiver one for a team right now for fantasy purposes. And with Cooks, he consistently, I think, is slept on. Not sure if this video is playing. There we go. I think he's consistently slept on all the time for being a guy who's produced very well. I have to pull that back up. But with Brandon Cooks, I'll go over the numbers here in a second. But going back this past season, wasn't like a top 10 wide receiver or anything along those lines, but he was wide receiver 27. Again, I think that's pretty good for fantasy purposes, especially if you need a guy in the flex. But in the past, we've seen Cooks 2018 wide receiver 16, 2017 wide receiver 13, 2016 wide receiver 7, 2015 wide receiver 11. So he's bounced around some teams, obviously, but he's consistently been a guy that provides a lot of yardage every single season. He's a good fantasy asset, and he continues to slip in drafts. So I looked at the Fantasy Football Calculator website, and they have data for ADP from April through May. They have like over 9,000 mock drafts that they put together, and Cooks was going number 90 overall in those mock drafts for PPR purposes. Cooks, again, I think is very talented. The big question is who's going to be the quarterback? Is that going to be an issue for 2021 with the Deshaun Watson turmoil? Is it going to be him? Is it going to be Tyrod Taylor? Is it going to be Mills, the rookie? It's a big question. But this past season, Cooks, 3 games over 140 receiving yards. He had 12, 10, and 16 target games. Wide receiver 2 from weeks 5 and 6. Well, it's only a 2-week sample size, but still those 2 weeks he was the wide receiver 2. At the end of the season, week 16 and 17, he was the wide receiver 1 across those 2 weeks. So Cooks obviously knows how to ball out. knows how to find the yardage on the field. I think the target volume is going to be good regardless of who the quarterback is. So all good factors: 30.1, 21.8, 17.3, 27.1, and 39.6. Those are some of the big fantasy weeks that Cooks had this past season, and those weeks would have been huge for you for fantasy. So again, he's a wide receiver 1 on his team. They just drafted Nico Collins, who I like a lot, but he's not going to be that top tier guy. Kiki Kuti is still in the system. Randall Cobb, I believe, in the slot. But Brandon Cooks is that team's wide receiver 1, and you can get him for very, very cheap right now. And he's a guy that I want because he's done it a bunch of times. So Russell Gage. Russell Gage is another guy that had some decent value in 2020 when he was actually given some volume and some targets. So weeks 1 and 2, wide receiver 11. So those first 2 weeks of fantasy, if you were flexing him, you were pretty happy with his production. He's seen a handful of weeks in the 16, 17, 18 range, but he's also had some big games. Week 17 versus Tampa Bay, 9 catches for 91 yards, a touchdown, 25.2 fantasy points. He had 4 games this season with 10 plus targets. So Gage being a guy that popped in and out of fantasy this past season, I think he's got a real chance to be even more so involved if Julio Jones ends up leaving. He was actually pretty good with Julio and Ridley on the field at the same time, so it's not like if Julio stays, he won't have any sort of relevance or involvement, but the target volume can go up and be more consistent. I think that's what's separating Gage from being a better asset, is consistent volume versus having these big weeks and then weeks where he's under 7-8 points. So Russell Gage, based off of that fantasy football calculator website, 206th overall pick when it comes to where he's being drafted, his ADP. So he is going so far down for mock drafts that if you take him at the end of your draft, you can be pleasantly surprised, especially if there are changes to the Falcons, even with them drafting Kyle Pitts, who's going to demand a lot too. Next guy, Jeff Wilson Jr. And you might say right away, well, they have 18 running backs in that system. But at the same time, I do have some good reasoning to why I think he can be involved or have the keys early on in the season. I know they did draft Trey Sermon. Trey Sermon is a guy I like. I think he's going to be a mean runner. He's going to be good in the NFL. I don't know if he's going to get the touches right away. Raheem Mostert is healthy and back, but this past season when Jeff Wilson actually got the opportunities with some of those injuries, he was very, very good. Week 3, 21.9. Week 7, 32. Weeks 16 and 17, he was the RB4 for those last 2 weeks, so he was awesome for the fantasy playoffs. 27.4 and 23.8. So him finishing so strong at the end of the season, who's to say that he doesn't have the keys right now to this running back committee, and he's the go-to guy? I mean, he finished the season hot. Who's to say the first few weeks of fantasy that they don't roll with this guy and give him a shot? They don't need to run Trey Sermon into the ground as a rookie when they have so many running backs. The big thing I like about Jeff Wilson, too, is that he is very, very, very good in the red zone. So he actually scored 28% of his red zone carries, which is very good. It doesn't seem like that's a high number, but that is very good for the red zone. He had 7 touchdowns on 25 carries. So give him the ball in the red zone. He's got a nose for scoring touchdowns. He's going to be very good. 66% of his catches went for touchdowns as well in the red zone, which is a small sample size, but still it just goes to the fact that the touches there in that area score. In fantasy, that's 6 points. It's huge. It's huge. So if Jeff Wilson has a shot at being the opening running back for the season and you want to draft him late, he's going 92nd overall based off of that website. If you draft him late and you can use him for 2-3 weeks and he helps you win one of those weeks or 2 of those weeks, I think it's well worth it, especially if it's redraft or you are in win now mode. So I know the committee is scary, and we don't know exactly how San Fran is going to go about it. But at the same time, I think Jeff Wilson is a guy that can be valuable as a flex, especially for a position that's not very deep. And he finished the season hot. Maybe he'll open the season hot. Great in the red zone. Give him the ball there, and we'll see what happens. Well, and this is Anthony Fergusor. So Anthony Fergusor was the backup tight end to Jonnu Smith in 2020. Jonnu Smith's now gone. So Jonnu had 65 targets. Corey Davis, who is a Jet now, had 92. So Davis and Smith combined for 157 targets in 2020. You can't always assume that, vacated targets are guaranteed to anybody, but, the Titans didn't really add one of those top pass catchers that they could have in this past draft. I mean, they have Josh Reynolds in the system too. So I think the door is kind of wide open right now for guys to get some volume, all right, because it can't just be 199 targets to A.J. Brown like a lot of people want it to be. Fergusor, week 13, he caught five balls, so he was involved there. Week 6 was his big game, which you are seeing right now. He had 8 catches for 113 yards and a touchdown, 25.3 fantasy points. So I think given the opportunity in an offense that does well moving the ball, I think he's got a clear shot at getting some of those vacated targets that are left behind. I'm not super sold on Josh Reynolds or the rookie they brought in. So a guy like Fergusor in a position where it seems like such a big dart throw. Again, we talked about it at the beginning of the slides. Volume is key for me. It's very important. So if he has a chance to step on the field and get 5, 6, 7 targets on a weekly basis and have the opportunity to score, I think Fergusor is a big time sleeper for the tight end position. So I know a lot of people say it's a dart throw, and outside the top 3 or 4 guys, it doesn't matter as much, but it does. You got to be smarter about how you approach a position if you don't get the Kelsey or the Waller or the Kittle or the Pitts. Top tier guys or Hawkinson. You can't just go in it with a blind eye and say, hey, I guess this guy can be something. Do some more research when it comes to the tight end position and see who can have good involvement. So Fergusor is a big time sleeper. That site that I have mentioned a bunch of times, he's not even listed on there. He's so low for ADP and for mock drafts. So you can get him probably with one of your last picks or off of the waiver wire, actually. So I think he's a guy you can take a shot on who can be involved this year and has a good opportunity at hand. So again, 4 sleepers, maybe not sleepers, 4 guys that have good value for where they are going in drafts versus what they can do in 2021. So definitely take a look at these 4 guys. I think Cooks was probably my number 1 to push for in this video, but these other guys I think have a good chance to be very usable in fantasy for a low cost.